is called a fleece. And I brought back a part of a fleece from the shearing shed. I'll show you what I saw there. First, I saw a flock of sheep with really thick fleeces. They were being driven into the shearing shed, where their hooves made quite a clatter on the wooden floor. Inside the shed, I watched the shearers fetch the sheep one by one. A team of shearers like this can shear a lot of sheep in a day, and it's very busy and crowded in the shed. The shearers know just how to hold the animals still, so they can cut the fleeces off cleanly. It might look a little uncomfortable for the sheep, but it doesn't hurt at all. In fact, it's a bit like you or me having a haircut, except that sheep usually get shorn once a year, and I usually have several haircuts. The shearers are experts at their job and don't miss a single strand of wool. You can see how neatly the fleece comes away from the body with one sweep of the clippers after another. The shearing shed is quite noisy with the sound of all the power-driven clippers. In the old days, before we had electricity, the men used to use hand tools, and shearing took much, much longer and was even harder work than it is now. Each person in the shed has his own job. Now this lad, his job is to gather up the fleeces. Every time a sheep is shorn, he whisks the fleece out of the way to leave room for the next one. And not one bit of wool is wasted. In this part of the wool shed, I watched the fleeces being spread out on a table, where more men picked off the really dirty bits around the edges before sending them off to the factory. I was wondering if the shorn sheep felt a bit chilly without their fleeces, and I went to have a look at them in the paddock. They were quite happy, and of course, their fleeces will grow till it's shearing time again. The sheep I visited had white fleeces, but my friend Mandy has coloured sheep, and here are a couple of the fleeces. Once the fleece is off the sheep, it has to be spun into yarn before we can use it to make knitting or cloth or carpets. Mandy doesn't buy her knitting wool from a shop, she spins it herself. I'll show you. Mandy has a spinning wheel to help her spin the wool from her sheep into yarn. People have been using spinning wheels for hundreds of years, and this was the way wool was spun long before factory machinery was invented to do it more quickly. Nowadays, not everyone who wants to knit has the time to spin their own wool, but Mandy finds it relaxing. Mandy drives the wheel with her foot and has to keep it going very smoothly and steadily. The wool is passed between her fingers and twisted onto a bobbin. Wool this colour can be used just as it is. It doesn't need dyeing. Homespun wool makes great jumpers for kids who live in cold places, like this one Warren's wearing. It features a Tasmanian tiger design on the back and on the front. Sean wears a brush-tailed possum on his jumper, and it's made entirely from homespun wool. And brush-tailed possums are in for girls too. Here's Eleanor with a different possum design. Nelson the sheep is also made from homespun, naturally coloured wool. But the wool for Sarah's jumper was spun and dyed in a factory. We used too much wool for it all to be prepared by hand. Do you remember those white fleeces from the shearing shed? The next time I saw them was at the factory where heaps of fleeces were moving along a conveyor belt on their way to be washed. At this stage, the wool didn't look in the least little bit like knitting wool, but it did look as though it could do with a jolly good wash. This giant washing machine does the same job as your parents' smaller one. It washes the wool gently in warm, soapy water. After a thorough washing, which gets rid of most of the dirt, the water is pressed out of the wool by these huge rollers. And it's pretty warm and steamy working in here. When the rollers have squeezed out most of the water, the wool moves on through drying cabinets and comes out fluffy and much cleaner. And now it looks much like this, nice and soft and fluffy. But it still doesn't look much like knitting wool, does it? I walked on through the factory to look at what happened next and found a machine straightening the wool and cleaning it some more. The washing hadn't removed all the grass seeds and burrs, and this machine got rid of them very neatly. I was really curious now. The wool looked as if it would be great for keeping people who live in cold places warm, but how could this fluffy stuff get to be knitting yarn? Well, the factory was huge, and I saw lots more things happen to the wool. It came off the straightening machines into drums, and now I thought it looked rather like smoke going the wrong way. The coil of straightened wool was fed into another machine which combed it and made sure it was quite ready for spinning. I couldn't see the combs inside the machine, but I could see the wool beginning to look different. It's amazing to think all these things have to be done to the wool before it can be made into knitting yarn. It takes hours, and the machines in this factory make people's work much easier. So, I saw the wool fibres being straightened like this, and then combed like this, ready for spinning. The spinning machines at the factory didn't look a bit like Mandy's spinning wheel, but they spun the wool onto bobbins very quickly and evenly. Most of the machines in the factory keep going day and night, and of course they need people to look after them. but I didn't see very many on my visit. Yet another machine wound the spun wool into skeins automatically, but it was unloaded by hand, and it was good to see another person. Now you can knit with this quite easily. But the wool you get in shops comes in lots of different colours, and I was curious to see some wool being dyed. This happened to the factory too, so I went along to have a look. In the dyeing room, the yarn goes into a tank of dye. Each tank in the room contains a different coloured dye, and the yarn is slowly lowered into it and left for quite a while, so the dye can work properly. I watched some dyed wool coming out of one of the tanks, but I didn't wait to see it dried. When the dyed wool is dried, it still has to be wound into balls. Each ball is very neat and even. There's a great machine for doing this at the factory. I stood and watched it for ages. It was really neat the way that machine wound the wool into balls automatically, finishing one and beginning another over and over again. It fixed the labels too. So putting the balls into packets was the only thing left to do by hand. Except driving the wool train to the dispatch room, where the packets are sent to the shops. That's the job I'd like. Going around that factory made me really interested in knitting, and I'm trying to knit the longest scarf in the world. But I think I'd rather try counting sheep than stitches. I'll get Rose and Martin to help me.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm trying to get to sleep and it's past 11. Trying to get to sleep, so I'm counting sheep. Jumping over gates in big sheep leaps. Ho hum, ho hum. Trying to get to sleep and counting sheep. Ho hum, ho hum. Trying to get to sleep and counting sheep. I'm still trying to sleep and it's way past 2. I'm still counting sheep, jumping over a gate. 65,108. Ho hum, ho hum. Trying to get to sleep and counting sheep. Ho hum, ho hum. Trying to get to sleep and counting sheep.
Larry here, he's a bit small to be jumping over gates in big sheep leaps. And he's certainly too small to be shorn yet. Let's count sheep again.